All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our panel, focusing on resilience in kids and teens. I am Alyssa, and I am going to be your host today. And I am joined by three wonderful ladies. So we'll just go around and introduce ourselves, and then we'll get to the topic. So Grace, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a counselor in training here at CCA. I primarily work with adolescents, teens, and young adults who are navigating anxiety, grief, and depression symptoms. I got my master's from Missouri Baptist University, and I am working towards my licensure.
All right.
Yay.
Thank you for joining. I also got my master's from Missouri Baptist University. So
So
great
fun.
school. All right, Tiffany, you want to tell us about yourself?
Hi, thank you. I'm Tiffany Wild. I'm a provisionally licensed professional counselor, and I also work with adolescents, teens, young adults, individuals, some couples, some families. With couples, I prefer pre-married. That's my favorite. I work with a little bit grief, anxiety, depression, just common things that we hear most. That's all, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And then Sandy, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sandy Piper. I am the co-founder of Chesterfield Counseling Associates and also a licensed professional counselor. I see a lot of different people. I am EMDR trained, which is a trauma-informed treatment, but I do a lot of work with kids and parents. And I am a parent myself. I am the oldest female in my family, and we now are a large family. So I've had lots and lots of experience with kids.
That is true. Yes. So you guys, it sounds like you come with a wealth of knowledge. So that's going to be perfect for this panel, focusing on kids and teens. So I will start with you, Grace. When we're talking about resilience, what does that mean in relation to kids and teens? Can you explain that a little bit for people who are listening?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alyssa. And I think at times, like resiliency, the idea of it can be challenging to understand. So I like to think of resiliency as a rubber band.
Okay.
Um, the way that it can be stretched on in different ways and it return back to its original form. So resiliency is the ability to bounce back after challenges and tough times. For children, challenges and tough times include experiences like starting a new school, starting kindergarten, moving houses, welcoming new siblings into the family. For teens, these challenges could look like starting a job, giving a presentation, peer conflict, receiving a grade that you weren't expecting. And children can learn resiliency through their experiences. So each time your child overcomes a problem, it builds their confidence and their ability to handle the next challenge.
I love that you brought the prop in. That is a great visual. Especially like just if as I was putting these questions together, I was thinking to myself, we all hear about resiliency. That's like a word that is very present in our lives right now, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint what that means sometimes. And so that was a very nice visual. Um, Sandy, can you talk about a little bit why is it hard for kids and teens to be resilient? What challenges kind of stand in their way, or what makes it so that some kids can have this resiliency and then some kids don't seem to?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been asking myself that question since I was very young. I used to live with foster kids, and I saw that all the time. Some kids would be really good and they would seem to rise to a challenge, and other children would be crushed by it. One of the things that I think is facing our kids now, and I think we need to all keep it in mind, is that we've just been through a pandemic, and our children, by and large, lost out on 2 to 3 years of social learning. And that learning is really important because we build distress tolerance and problem solving skills by actually experiencing life and moving through things. So I always like to throw that out there because kids can look perfectly fine. A 15-year-old from 4 years ago looks the same as a 15-year-old today. But that 15-year-old from 4 years ago, maturity wise and in terms of social learning, is in a very different place. So research actually shows that when we spend too much time apart, when we come back together, we actually experience more anxiety. And it takes a while to recover from that.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of that over like since the pandemic, kind of an uptick in anxiety and in kids not being able to like bounce back from and trauma for kids. It can be something really big, but it could be something to them that's traumatic that isn't like wouldn't necessarily be to somebody else. I'll say in the classroom, we see the same thing as teachers. So I'm a teacher during the day and the amount of kids who have a hard time having social interactions between a fourth grader 5 years ago and a fourth grader now. I mean, it's night and day. So it's a good point and something to remember. The pandemic isn't going to go away. The effects from that, right? So Tiffany, we all like grew up in a certain time period, and the kids now are growing up in a completely different environment. How are the troubles that your child or children that you see might be facing different from the troubles that you might have faced as a child or their parents might have faced as a child? And then how can we better understand what our children are going through to help them through that?
I really love and appreciate this question because it's something that I'm consistently looking at the lens through, no matter who's sitting in front of me in the room, is what has their experience been before, and what are they coming through versus my own, and what am I bringing into the room that's very different. So I really appreciate this question. And in terms of generational differences, I mean, I think it's going to be really important to remember, without demonizing this topic, is that this is the first generation who's lived their lives saturated by mobile technology and social media. Right? I mean, and so no other generation can speak to what that actually means or feels like, or the problems that could potentially come out of it, especially in terms of this topic of resilience, which is like Grace showed us, the ability to bounce back. Like everything is so different now. The information overload that comes from that versus what it was like as a slower paced reality for people before they had access to all of the things. I've talked before about how the one thing I used to be scared of when I was a kid was kidnapping. And that was because it was on the milk carton next to the cereal box, right? And that was kind of the only crime I knew of. I wasn't so interested in the news, you know?
Right.
But now kids have access to all of the negative news immediately. The social connections, while might be increased in terms of time spent talking to each other, it's not embodied like in the same way. The data is showing that young people are wanting to stay home more than they are wanting to go be with other people and get on their devices. It's not the same. Sandy's already pointed that out, just in the context of what it's like to come back together and what that's doing to someone's physiology. And I think another point is that I've noticed that boredom to some of the young people, children and adolescents that I work with, almost feels like a scary prospect because they don't know what's going to happen with their thoughts. They haven't been conditioned to think positively necessarily when they're all alone. They're conditioned, however, to think the thoughts that are negative. And as we know, thoughts create actual things in our lives. So those were the first items that I thought of in terms of what some generational differences are. And I think something that might be just important to mention is that this new generation of kids and young and teens and even young adults, they have some very positive qualities in terms of their empathy and kindness and inclusion of others. And yet some of it's coming at a cost because it's increasing the sensitivity level that they weren't expecting. And so with an increased sensitivity, even to language that's being used, the First Amendment is considered, outdated. And so with that in mind, how do we then even enter into differences? Because the schools and universities, and you might know this quite well, are removing the conflict, removing the things that are causing discomfort, as opposed to saying, well, like, wait, let's engage in it and teach each other how to manage our differences together. So those are some big differences I've noticed. Because I don't recall having discomfort removed. It was more, how do I get through this? You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's huge because going forward in your job, or in life at any time, nobody's going to come in and remove the discomfort from you. You're just going to have to find a new job, or you're going to have to get a new situation. And so yeah, and I also appreciated how you said, without demonizing like this generation and kind of the technology that they are immersed in, because it's not going away, right? So like I feel like I hear a lot of times like, and there are things that we need to be mindful of. Those news stories that kids are seeing right now, all the bad news and things like that, their parents might not even know that they're seeing it. So that's another thing. Like parents you can't be constantly there with your child, but it's just important to note that there are positives of this generation, and just because you didn't go through some of these same challenges doesn't mean they're not still very valid.
Yeah,
So
and a different kind of stress
yeah.
as well.
Mhm.
We always read in our own life experiences to what's going on. And I think it's important to understand that this is a different kind of stress.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been a written protocol for the ideal nature of it yet, especially as Sandy pointed out, from a pandemic that we're all trying to figure out as we go, which the data will continue to come out. But for now, this is a pandemic that was the first of its kind, and there was no idyllic formula for care.
Right. So
It's interesting. It's interesting, Tiffany, that you mentioned about the removal of disagreement or conflict, because one of the treatments that we have for anxiety and for OCD is exposure therapy. So if you are agoraphobic, for example, we might have you open your front door, and then we might have you step out onto the porch, and then we might have you to walk to the mailbox. So we're gradually exposing you to the thing that you're afraid of as a way to build distress tolerance. And when we remove all of that, then it makes sense that we would have more anxiety when we come into contact with it, because we have no experience.
Yeah.
So with all of this, there's got to be ways for parents, or anyone who works with kids or teens, to help them build resilience. So maybe from this point and before, they've not had to overcome these problems and they've not had to go through these things to build that resilience. But Grace, can you think of any tips or ways that people who are involved with kids and teens on a daily basis can help them build this resilience?
Yeah, so I came up with 4 practical ways
Okay.
parents can kind of help support their child or teen through resiliency or building it. The first is support your child, but try not to fix every minor problem or disappointment. So, for example, that might look like if your child doesn't get invited to a birthday party, you could talk about the feelings, how it feels to not be invited, instead of trying to fix why they weren't invited or getting them invited. Secondly, avoid predicting and preventing problems for your child or teen. This might mean if you see that your child's homework is done incorrectly, letting your child hand it in incorrectly so that they can overcome that themselves and understand that it was a setback. Thirdly, I would say help your child identify and manage strong emotions. So if your child is nervous or anxious about a family member who's sick, you could say, I can see that you're worried about grandpa or grandma. And it's okay to be worried. But remember, we are doing everything we can to do to help them. Fourthly, I would say encourage your child to have another go when things don't go right the first time.
Right.
So praising your child for trying, no matter the result. Making comments like, I'm proud of you for finishing the race, or I'm proud of you for giving it another try.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you just made it very practical for parents as a starting point and gave them that language too. So thank you. Excuse me. Alongside of giving those tips, Tiffany, I feel like sometimes kids, they look up to the adults in their lives, and they kind of model their behavior after the adults in their lives. So what are some ways that the adults in their lives can model resilience, that can help positively impact your child, and build that resilience within themselves?
Yes, I think before even you can do what Grace was suggesting is a parent has to take an inventory on how they're even presenting, because it will look very hypocritical or incongruent and confusing to a child if what they're suggesting the child do isn't being done. And they're watching it all. And depending on their age and what their ability to comprehend is, they're going to notice, even if it's something small. So, but before I fully answer that question, I want to just make mention of Dr. Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscientist out of Stanford, who he suggests that the data overwhelmingly supports that restorative motivation is crucial to the success or failure of building resilience in the first place. And in order to have restorative motivation, it's going to require really good sleep, social interaction, preferably embodied or in person, and the opportunity to engage in some form of play. So with those three things in mind, like parents, are you doing these things? Are you watching if your family is doing these things? Are they sleeping well? Are you spending time together? Are you actually engaging in some form of play? Preferably low competition, but still, like, take an inventory on the family with that. But so if those things are in place and you're modeling that well, and you have like this anchor system, then healthy amounts of self-care, I think, is a really good start. This means meditation, this means proper nutrition, this means good exercise. Social and emotional and mental health care is very crucial. I heard the recent data on some meditation practices that 30 days of meditation, 30 minutes of meditation for 21 days increases the emotional regulation center in the brain by 22.8%.
Wow.
Wow.
Allowing the capacity to like respond more flexibly or properly during emotionally charged situations is so important. But if you can restore almost 25% of that emotional regulation in your brain by a little bit of meditation in just 21 days, consistency is going to be key, and kids are going to see that, and see that how important it is. I mean, I would think as a parent, that would even feel good to me, let alone know how it's impacting my child. I think another just practical tip is practicing the art of reframing. This does not mean optimism at all costs. This means noticing there's negative situations in life, noticing that they happen and the emotion attached to them, and then consider ways in which you can see things differently, where you can potentially see a positive outcome out of a negative circumstance. Dad loses his job. Everybody feels and looks devastated. It is a devastating event in a home. We mourn, we show grief, we show that feelings are hard, and then say, and you know what, maybe this is going to give Dad the opportunity to go fulfill this dream that he's had of being a woodworker. I mean, he's been in an office all day, but man, he's wanted to be a woodworker and he's never been able to do that. And maybe this is going to be his chance, because paying attention to our mindset is often going to affect our entire system, whether we realize it or not. So if we're able to welcome in some resilience building positive attitudes out of negative circumstances, it's going to be really helpful. Modeling healthy friendships and relationships is key. This means knowing how to set healthy boundaries. There's going to be relationships in our lives that are not so good. So what's it look like to maybe express confrontation in a healthy way, age appropriately so, with a friend or family member? What's it look like to model what it is to protect yourself when needed? What's it look like to show how having a difference of opinion can be possible and still be friends afterwards, like all of those components. And I think the last one that I just want to mention, because I see it so much, is modeling what it looks like to fail forward or make mistakes and it be okay.
Right.
according to UC Berkeley, making mistakes, young people making mistakes, it's one feature that they're saying they don't want to make it. They're scared of it. They're scared to try because of it. And it's a really high up on the list item. So I'm constantly encouraging parents to consider showing them what it looks like to try something new, and make it like try a new recipe together. And if it flops, problem solve together what it looks like to figure out why, and then say, okay, and now we know we can pivot, we can go this direction. We should have added baking soda and not baking powder, and let's try that next time. And you know what, this mistake doesn't make me a loser or a only a mistake maker. This just taught us how to grow differently. Having parents talk through what that might look like will help them and encourage them to not make mistakes a part of their identity.
Yeah. And I think there's such a push, especially with like social media and things like that, for parents to feel like they have to be perfect and like not let their kids see their failures, or not let their kids see them try something and then fail. But in reality, like that's the thing that the kids need to see in order to build it within themselves. So I feel like there's just so many different pieces that are working together that like we need to fix. So what happens though? Like, so say you notice your child is just kind of lacking in the resiliency department. We've modeled it. We've given these, we've used these tips and tricks. What can we as parents do when our child just feels like hopeless, or we've tried to let them know that, hey, just because you failed this test, or that it's gonna be okay, but they are just feeling hopeless, or like nothing is gonna get better. What are some things that we can do to help our kids when they feel like this is just unmanageable? Sandy, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. People come here and they ask, like, what do you do in counseling with kids? And a lot of what I do is just ask questions. Surprisingly, people oftentimes answer those questions better for themselves than I could ever if I fed them the information. And I tell parents that it's not my job to teach them what to think, it's to teach them how to think.
Right.
And the same thing is true when they're experiencing sort of these blocks, loss of a friend, they feel hopeless or helpless. What they need is a sense of connection. And in some cases, ways to regain control or feel like they have some control. So like when you look at the issue, like major issues in life, like if somebody talks about global warming, oftentimes I'll just feel overwhelmed because like I can't do anything about it as an individual. But if you talk to me about recycling, I'm like, yeah, go, I can do that. And it's the same kind of thing with the child. The child can't change, like, I hate the whole school and it's not fair in the lunchroom and whatever. So I'll try to ask questions to get at maybe what they like something they like, something that went well. What is one thing that they could do? I'll start to ask them questions and try to enter their world, and also create that sense that they are being heard and understood. Yeah.
I think that's huge for kids to feel heard and understood, like the adult in their lives actually care about what they're saying. So, why, and I think all of you could have spoken to all these questions, and this one especially probably, but Sandy, I'll give it to you first, and if anyone wants to jump in, they can. Why is it so important to have someone to walk with you through this journey versus doing it alone? So like as a parent, if you're struggling with your child feeling like this, or like as a child, why might it be helpful to have someone that's kind of on the outside looking in, help your child walk through this with you? And then to piggyback off that, are there any resources for kids or teens that you could recommend that could help them, or for parents that you could recommend to help them get started?
It's always frustrating for parents because oftentimes the counselor will say the exact same thing that a parent said, and the child will go home and they'll say, oh my gosh, Miss Tiffany said this. And the parent's like, I'd echo in here,
Yeah.
And as a parent myself, I get the same thing. I actually had somebody else teach my children how to drive because I wanted to have a relationship with my kids at the end of that experience, right? But they didn't want to hear it from me. They could hear it from somebody else. And I think that that's why counseling is so valuable when you're parenting, is because you can get validation for the things that you're going through. But your counselor is an advocate for the relationship between the parent and the child. And oftentimes the child can hear things from the counselor that they can't hear from their parent. Doesn't mean they're not listening. It just means that because of the developmental stage, it makes it more problematic. And then as far as resources, the journey. So why is it so important for us to have somebody else along that journey? We regulate our emotions through other people. Even what was that one movie with Tom Hanks where he put a face on a ball, you know?
Oh,
Yeah, and he was on a deserted island all by himself.
Castaway.
Castaway. Yes. Okay. And how upset he was when he lost the ball.
Right.
For, like, because we, as human beings, we are designed to live life face to face, and we need each other. We are social animals. So to have that sense that someone is with me, that I'm not doing this alone, that builds distress tolerance. And actually our brains experience, if we are with a trusted someone and we have to go through a painful experience, they've done fMRI studies that show that people with a trusted person experience less pain than an individual by themselves. I'm not sure I would have signed up for that study. Intentional infliction of pain. But
what kind of pain are we talking about?
Some brave souls did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if parents, so like some of the things that I do, I'm a big question person, asking good questions, and sometimes asking questions that are just sort of, they might just be fun questions. Like, what's the best place you've ever gone on vacation and why, and would you go back? It's a great question, but it doesn't really, I'm not talking about your feelings. I'm just talking about something fun. So I'm turning my attention to something that's interesting. I'm getting you to talk and getting you to listen. And some people have a hard time with that. I actually brought my own props. So I particularly like these cards. They're called Our Moment cards.
Okay.
And they have them for kids, couples, families, and then they have a generations one.
Okay.
And if you're stuck and you're not sure what questions to ask, sometimes I'll just sit down with my kids and go, okay, I'll just pick one. What politician have you admired the most and why? I mean, what wars have been fought during your lifetime? That would be one maybe to ask the grandparents. But you can come up with a bunch of questions and they're they can be fun. There's a lot of other ones. Another thing you can do, here's another card deck. It's called The Real Deal. And this one can be a good way to start talking to your children about values. It's a card sort. You have them go through, pick out what's most important to you. And then you can talk about those. And then you can talk about how your values might be the same or different type of thing. Another good book is Get Your Teenager Talking.
Okay.
It also has a lot of prompts for parents. So, and then there's the anxiety workbook for children. Some of the exercises I don't love, but they do have some really good ones in there too. So,
well, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is relationship building.
It is.
Like not necessarily focusing on the problem at hand or the not negative, but just like what your child is going through, but really just learning to be with your child and getting to know them as a person, which then can help build their resilience. But it's like you got to have that relationship piece first in order to begin that journey. So well, that is all. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you, ladies, so much for answering them for me. And I hope that listening in has helped answer some questions. If anybody wants to contact any of these lovely women, I will make sure to have all of their contact information in the comments. So check that out. And that's all I have for you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.